Hi, it's Louise's Bible study. I'm back on the air being videoed. It seems that a lot of people would rather see my face than hear my voice. Not that I think I'm that great at looking, but it's a better way of making contact with people. So here I am. We're coming up on Easter, and Easter, we've just like Christmas, we've sometimes we've lost the concept of what Easter was all about. Easter is a wonderful time of the year, and I love, in case you can't tell, bunny rabbits, Easter eggs, all the colors of Easter. I'm all about it. And I don't oppose people having Easter baskets and bunny rabbits and Easter eggs in your house. Unless you tend to make them an image or an idol and you find yourself bowing down in front of a bunny rabbit or an Easter egg and worshiping it. Other than that, it's just a symbol of Easter. It has nothing to do with being in a cult. It has a cult background, but we're not going to go into that. But I just want you to know, Happy Easter, here I am. And, but I want to talk about covenant because the cross is the culmination of the two covenants. And a covenant, we need to understand what it is because we don't teach covenant today in the churches like we should. I didn't know anything about covenant at all until I went to Bible school out in Tulsa, Oklahoma at Rhema. I remember one of the first classes I had was on blood covenant. I was so excited about it, I just could pop. I called up my pastor at home and I said, he came from a mainline denomination, and I said, have you ever heard of the blood covenant? And he went, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, did you not learn about it in seminary? And he said, no. And when I started telling him about it, he got so excited. And he thought, well, that is really, really neat. And in our society today, there are a lot of things that we have that revolve around a covenant, but we don't teach covenant. And the basis of all covenants started in the Garden of Eden. And the main thing we need to understand is that God is a covenant-keeping God. And therefore, we need to understand what a covenant is, what is our part in a covenant when we enter into it, and how do we enter into this covenant that God has established, and what are the benefits of being in a covenant. And so let's start out talking about Bible covenant. The Bible is divided into the Old Testament and New Testament. And basically it's the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. We have a covenant that was under the law, and we have a covenant that's under grace. And Jesus is the dividing point between these two covenants. But he's the culmination of it all. And so what is a covenant? A blood covenant is between two parties. It is the closest, the most enduring, and the most solemn of all covenants, of any kind of contract or anything you can enter into. And it is the most sacred of all contracts. It is absolutely cannot be broken. It is a very, very serious thing to break a covenant. You know, in the New Testament, it just suddenly, the Holy Spirit brought to my remembrance. In the New Testament, it talks where Paul says that if a believer who has embraced Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, been born again, tasted of the Word and of the gifts, and this person willfully, this has to be a mature individual, but they willfully turn around and deny Jesus Christ, there is no help for them. And they cannot come back and crucify Christ all over again because they suddenly realize they've changed their mind. This has to be somebody that really knows what they're doing. But what he's saying here is this is a person who has entered into a covenant with God through the blood of Jesus Christ. And then when they decide to get out of that covenant, they have broken the covenant. And for God, that is absolutely a no-brainer. You don't go back on it. You do not do that, because he is a God that will not turn his back on his people unless they break their covenant with him. Marriage is a covenant. It is a blood covenant. The eating of the wedding cake, I always wondered about that. Why was my husband trying to stuff a piece of cake in my mouth and vice versa? And what was it symbolizing? I thought it was, well, this is just what they do, or it's just a ritual we went through. No, actually, this is part of covenant. This is very much a part of a covenant. And what it is saying is we are coming together as one, and we are partaking of our flesh. Now we're not flesh eaters. We don't go around and start chewing on each other. We're not cannibals, but we have symbols that symbolize certain things in life that we do. And partaking of the cake is like the covenant meal. And it's saying that I am partaking of you, and your flesh is becoming a part of my flesh, and vice versa, and therefore we are becoming one. The wedding ring on the third finger is an interesting covenant symbol, because it's believed that on the third finger, it's the one where the nerve leads to the heart. Now, if you're a doctor and you get all uptight about this, then forgive me, because, I'm just going by what I was reading. I'm not a physician, so I don't know this, but they do believe that it is a nerve that runs to the heart, and the heart is the center of man in the flesh, your heart, your beating heart. And so that you take a gold ring. Now, we've substituted the wedding band for a lot of different types of, rings today. But the solid gold band is what really is what was intended, because it is eternal. There is no beginning, there's no end on it. And the gold is purity. And that symbol is put upon you and your husband's finger. And it's a pledge of covenant to one another. And the covenant began in the Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve had a covenant with God. Actually, Adam entered into this covenant with God, and God said, if you will keep my covenant, if you will tend my garden, and look after all of the things that I've given to you, and stay within the parameters of my covenant, I will bless you from here to all eternity. And the one parameter that you cannot go into, that will break this covenant, is I do not want you to eat of the tree of good and evil, of knowledge of good and evil. And that was the one thing that they broke. They just couldn't stay away from it. And the thing about it was, Adam did it knowing, absolutely with full knowledge of what he was embracing. So he didn't just blindly fall into this trap. He did it decisively. And therefore, when he broke covenant with God in the garden, he became spiritually dead. And in becoming spiritually dead, he began to die physical. Physical death entered into man when spiritual death entered into man in the Garden of Eden. And along with that became a curse, because cursed is every man who breaks the covenant. When you break a covenant, there are blessings that are pronounced over you, and there are curses that are pronounced over you. And the blessings are, if you keep my covenant with me, you're going to be blessed, and yada, 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 yada. But if you break my covenant, these are the things that are going to come upon you because of the broken covenant. And the curses that came upon mankind and Adam and the garden were threefold. They were three curses. It was spiritual death, It was physical death, sickness, and it was poverty. So poverty, sickness, and spiritual death came upon man as a curse for breaking this covenant. Um, the reasons for cutting a covenant is, I'm going to give you three reasons. The stronger cuts with the weaker tribe. Okay, if you were, Stanley and Livingston were missionaries in Africa, and the way they managed to get through all of Africa without being eaten or beheaded by some tribe was that they found out about covenant. It's interesting that Africa, India, China, you can go through any nation you want to, and you're going to find some form of knowledge of covenant in their background. And in Africa, they would enter into covenants. With a weaker tribe, would enter into a covenant with a stronger chieftain, and they would protect one another. And so that's what he would do. He would find a chief, a strong chief. He would enter into a covenant with him. And then when the enemy would come along, or another tribe would come along and try to attack him, he would show him through the covenant scar that he had on his arm that he had entered into this covenant with this other tribe. And then the tribe that was going to attack them backed off because they didn't want to have to mess with the big tribe that was standing behind him. You see, it's sort of like if you're on the playground and you're a little squirt, eventually you're going to try to find a big dude on that playground, and you're going to buddy up to him, and you're going to let him be your defender in the playground, and whoever messes with you know they're going to have to mess with him, and they don't want to mess with him, so they're not going to mess with you. And that's kind of what happens here when you cut covenant with the stronger and weaker tribe. Businesses, there's one way of reason for cutting a covenant is to go into a business. You want to cut covenant with somebody that's financially stable, maybe in a better financial position even than you are. But we're going to see how this works out, because in covenant, what is mine materially is yours also. So if you have debts, then I am, as your covenant partner, responsible for helping to pay off your debt. So you want to be very careful who you enter into a covenant relationship with business-wise, because if you enter in with somebody that's got a lot of debt, you're going to end up holding it. But if you're somebody that's not very prosperous, you want to find somebody that's very prosperous to back you up in your business dealings and to kind of prop you up if you get into financial difficulty. So we can do this for financial reasons, for business reasons. And then the other one is for love. And the great story of that is David and Jonathan, which we will teach about later on as we discuss covenants. But there is a covenant love that comes in when you break covenant with somebody. Actually, your covenant partner becomes closer to you than your natural relative. You actually see that covenant partner that you've entered into with, and they are closer to you than your own brother or sister or family member. And so it is a very, very close and tight relationship. Those are some of the reasons we have. Now we're going to go into steps. These are steps that you go through and enter into a covenant. Now you may be saying, Louise, why are we talking about all this? Because we're going to see how all this plays out at the cross. Every bit of this accumulates at the cross, and it puts the cross into perspective. Because I never understood the cross. I never completely understood. I accepted it. I believed it. But I really didn't understand it. The understanding didn't come before the believing. The believing came first, and now God has opened my eyes and given me revelation as to what really took place on that cross. And it is so awesome for us to understand all this. So the first thing that you're going to do if you're going to enter into this covenant with this individual is you're going to take a coat or a robe. I'm going to give you something of my clothing, whether it be a coat, whether it be a sweater for a woman, what a shirt, I don't care. It's a symbol that all that I am materially, everything that I possess financially, all that I own becomes yours, and vice versa. And so exchanging of the clothing is an exchanging of our material wealth and finances back and forth between each other. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take off a belt. Now, we don't understand that today, but back then, men wore belts as part of their armor when they went into battle. And a belt is talking about your strength. It is basically saying, all of my ability to fight for you, I am giving to you, and you're going to give me your belt, which is saying all of your ability to fight for me is an exchange of our strength. Okay? So, where you're weak, I'm going to come in and I'm going to prop you up, and vice versa. And so it's an exchanging of our strength. Step 3 is going to be the cutting of the covenant. And this can be done in different ways, but the way they did it oftentimes would be you would cut a place in the palm of your hand, and then you would take your hand and your covenant partner's hands, and you would put the two hands together, and you would grip the two hands, and this would be a symbol of my blood, who I am, is flowing into you, and who you are, the very essence of you, is flowing into me, and therefore our bloods intermingle and we become one. And we are not separate anymore, but we are one. And I think there's some countries, I believe it's India, I think I saw this, but it may be in some countries such as Pakistan or others, where in the marriage ceremony, I thought it was very interesting, they don't cut their arms, but the husband and the wife put their arms together like this, and then they take a scarf and they wrap it around their hands and their arms. And this is the same kind of symbol that we have with the shaking of the hands, or the putting of the hands together, is that they are now becoming one. That is a covenant ritual. And so what would be a covenant ritual today? Well, it would be the handshake. You know, we go around shaking hands, and we've lost the concept of what that actually means. But I can remember, actually, I'm old enough, that if you shook your hand on a promise, that was a done deal. I can remember my daddy saying that we shook hands on it, and that we didn't have to have a contract. You had your word, and you shook your hand on it, and that was it. And you didn't break the deal. It was that important. That is a covenant symbol. That goes back to covenant. It's interesting how we do these things in our society, and yet we're so totally unaware of them. And so number 4, we're going to raise the right arm, and we're going to mix our bloods together. As I told you, you can do that. You know, you can either mix your blood through this way or through this way. The cutting of the covenant in the first instance, I said that it was the palm of the hand, but actually it was the cutting of the animals. And I need to go back on that one, because what they would do is they would cut an animal completely in two, and they would lay the pieces flat on the ground, and then they would have the bloody halves on either side, and the individuals that were entering the covenant would walk a figure eight in between the two bloody halves, and that would be a symbol of an eternal covenant, and the two bloody halves would be a symbol of, if you break this covenant, then you're going to be like these bloody pieces down here that the vultures can come and partake of. It was a very serious matter. Now we're going to exchange names. So if you enter into a covenant, number 5, you're going to exchange names. I'm going to take a portion of your name into my name, and you're going to take a portion of your name into mine and yours. You know, in Latin American countries, I was telling that they still do that today. There's a girl that's on the Fox News channel in the morning. She's of Latino heritage, and she uses her whole name, and it's, I forgot what her name is, but it's blank, and then she uses her maiden name, and then she is addressed as her marriage name. And that's covenant. That's a way you would do. Larry would incorporate my married name into his name, and I would incorporate his name into my name. So I would become Louise Carlton Clayton and maintain my part of my initial name. And then he would take part of my name into his, incorporated into his name. So we would incorporate names. I'm going to stop here because my husband has given me the signal that my time is up. And so we're going to end there, and we're going to start with step 6, which is making of a scar. So if you'll just be patient with us, I'm going to tune out right now, and I can say tune back in. Love you.